What is existentialism? This is a question many people have asked, I'm sure, and one of the most famous existential writers, Simone de Beauvoir, wrote an article, a 7-page treatise on that topic. What is existentialism? I'm going to read the introduction of it and then elucidate or expound upon the ideas that she suggests, and I will talk about the idea of an existential crisis, as that's something you often hear people say. The people who say that have either just come into contact with a word, or they genuinely feel like the walls are starting to cave in and perhaps they're having a midlife crisis. So, Simone de Beauvoir's article starts like this. I don't know how many times during my trip to America someone made this request, which was also familiar to me in France. Can you explain what existentialism is? And my interlocutor, the person who she's speaking to, undoubtedly curious about any novelty yet sparing with his time and effort, would add, in a few words or in 5 minutes. I disappointed many amiable people and made several journalists unhappy by refusing to comply. Some doubted my intellectual capacities, others were suspicious of a doctrine that could not be summarised in one sentence. However, at the risk of disappointing once again, I must say right away that even an article is not enough to give an account of existentialism. I only intend to dissipate some misunderstandings here. And some of the misunderstandings that she dissipates is that it can be summarised in 1 or 2 or 5 sentences. She goes on to say that it's not an inherently political movement. She argues that one wouldn't ask of Kant's work or Pascal or Hegel's work to be summarised in a soundbite. And she goes on to say that it's expressed well in, or rather through, the vehicle of plays, novels, novellas, literature. And that can be seen by the writers that she's often put with, one being Jean-Paul Sartre, famously her lover, and maybe we'll talk about him in a moment as well, and Albert Camus. All contemporaries with one another in Paris post-World War II. Of course, all three were alive, very much so, during World War II and the occupation of France. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote Nausea, I believe, in 1932, so before the war started. I believe it was during World War II. Camus wrote both the myth of Sisyphus and The Stranger, or The Outsider, L'Estrange, that famous novel. And Simone de Beauvoir, by the point of writing, or at the point of writing this article, What is Existentialism?, she had already written She Came to Stay, a brilliant novel that I haven't read from cover to cover, I must admit, that explores existential ideals of polyamorous relationships or ultimate freedom. It was a few years later that she would write her most famous work, The Second Sex, feminist, existential critique and exploration of the role of women in society. Famously, it's from that book the quote that says, "One is not born but becomes a woman." And Simone de Beauvoir, for my money, I prefer her writing to Sartre's. I've read more of Sartre's work. Her style of writing, and of course I'm reading translations, I'm not reading French because I can't. Her style of writing really reminds me of the lady, the female author, and I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, who wrote the My Brilliant Friend trilogy, the Italian writer. So Simone de Beauvoir, from a creative sense and an academic sense, clearly is a fantastic writer, and she is and will always be synonymous with existentialism and with Jean-Paul Sartre, a brilliant philosopher. One of my good friends who studied philosophy and continued to study at MA level while I was studying English literature and creative writing. He would often tell me about the books he was studying, as I would with him, and he had to study her Ethics of Ambiguity. It reminded me very much, from what he said, of Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. There are some archetypes and ideal existential personas people can adopt to deal with the meaninglessness of life. Which brings me on to what I would say, what is existentialism? Well, to me, first discovering it at university, perhaps slightly before at the Catholic school I attended in my youth, in the philosophy and theology classes there. Existentialism is essentially realising that the world has no inherent meaning, there is no God according to it, though Kierkegaard was a Christian and is often said to be the forefather, along with Nietzsche, who of course didn't have faith at all in the same way as the gloomy Dane. But it's essentially realising, and it's true for Camus, Sartre and de Beauvoir, that they were atheists also, but it's essentially realising that there's no inherent meaning in the world, there is no God, you born, you die. What's the famous Sartre equation? Something along the lines of existence precedes essence, or perhaps it's the other way around, I can't remember. But it essentially says that freedom is all we have and it's what you do with it, because this is a better analogy. There's a philosopher, a contemporary philosopher, English guy, I can't remember his name, but he said existentialism's like champagne. It's bubbly and glamorous and exciting, but when the bubbles simmer down, you realise it has the potential to be quite depressing and a powerful notion. So if somebody's saying they're going through an existential crisis, they're probably fed up with their job, with their life in the current state that it's in, and they are freaking out, very much like Roquentin in Nausea, Sartre's famous novel from the early 1930s. So that's just a little video on Simone de Beauvoir's What is Existentialism? Existentialism to me is a philosophy that will forever be associated with jazz, sex, cigarettes, Paris, the left bank, and incredible literature that has the potential to lead back to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, who are two mountains, two peaks of philosophy in the 19th century. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. What is existentialism? What is existentialism to you?